Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast, which is brought to you by the Timeline app. Timeline is state-of-the-art retirement income planning software that helps financial planners like me bring your retirement journey to life and answer your big retirement income questions. Now, I've been looking forward to chatting with this week's guest for some time. I'm sure you've read about the rise in financial fraud and scams. It seems to be all over the press. Recent statistics show that there were 3 million victims in the UK in 2018, and it's the fastest growing area of crime. The older generation seems to be particularly vulnerable to this type of crime, so of course it's a great topic for the Retirement Cafe. Now, there is hope, though. There is hope about these financial scams. We've got Louise Baxter-Scott. So she's with me today, and she founded and heads up the scams team. That's right, the scams team, would you believe it, for the National Trading Standards, and was awarded an MBE for services to protecting vulnerable people from financial abuse. A very warm welcome to the show, Louise.
Hello, thank you for having me on.
Now, I understand that you're at home today, which is very kind for you to hook in, and your dogs might start barking at some point in time. So if they do, that we know what's going on. So, Louise, how did you get involved in with the National Trading Standards scams team?
Well, I've been in trading standards now for nearly 18 years.
Wow.
I started. I went to university and I did a law degree at university because I wanted to be a barrister or a solicitor initially. And I ended up working, going to Australia for a year, and then came back. And basically, my mum told me if I wasn't to get a full-time job, I'd have to move out. So I applied for a job within East Sussex Trading Standards as a consumer advisor. And at that point in time, local trading standard services ran their own consumer helplines for people that needed advice and information on their consumer rights. So I applied for the job, and I was given the job. Very surprisingly, I was given the job as a consumer advisor, and that was 2002. I went on to do the trading standards qualification and sort of moved up through the ranks within East Sussex Trading Standards. And in 2010, in what was the sort of bonfire of the Quangos, when sort of the fair trading started to go, and there was a shift in government around what the government departments would look like. Historically, the Office of Fair Trading used to deal with mass marketing fraud, so letter fraud, and try and tackle that from a European and an international point of view. When they went, there was not really anybody doing anything about it. And the viewpoint was still that people didn't respond to scam letters, and it wasn't a problem. And that it was people didn't believe it, so that nobody was actually responding to those sort of letters. And if people did, the view from the general public and from the profession as well was that those people were just old and stupid.
Right. So for those who don't know, what's a scam letter?
So clairvoyance letters, lottery letters, fake lottery letters telling you that you've won a fake foreign lottery, inheritance letters saying that you've inherited a huge amount of money, you've just got to pay for the tax or a small amount of money to retrieve your inheritance.
Right.
The clairvoyance letters telling you things like, for example, there's money on your card, you just got to send £20 for your lucky talisman, or worse, if you don't send £20 for your lucky talisman, you're going to get killed in a terror attack.
Now, so this can't be a big problem, can it?
It's an enormous problem. It's still an enormous problem. And still there are thousands of consumers responding to these sort of letters.
Wow.
And it's a hidden crime because it's in people's homes. So people don't see it and people don't talk about it, because what we often find is with the criminals they're organised crime groups. And the criminals that target these consumers, they do generally tend to be the older end of our consumer market. So our average scam victim is 75.
Wow.
They target people that are socially isolated, that potentially live on their own, that may have some sort of cognitive decline. And we're still in the situation where generationally people don't talk about money. We're very British. We don't talk about money. We never talk about money, and we don't talk about whether or not we've got a lot of money or we haven't. So
Sure.
you don't generally, like the Americans talk about money. They talk about what they earn. They talk about how much they've got. They talk about how much they haven't got. Whereas we can be so stoic and British. We don't talk about these things. We don't talk about how much we earn or how much money we have or haven't got. People might go, oh, I haven't got a lot. I'm skint this month, but we don't generally talk about it as openly as other cultures may do. So with this sort of scam letters as well, you'll find that the criminals that target these people will tell them to keep it a secret.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sorry.
So,
You carry
well,
on.
Louise, what should people be looking out for? I mean, it probably is, I can imagine if I got a scam letter, it would go straight in the bin. But obviously, they're sending these letters because they work.
You
Um,
probably wouldn't get one because you wouldn't be on a list because you wouldn't respond.
right.
So
Okay.
it's very targeted.
So
It's
can you give me an example of, someone, give me a case history or something, maybe if you can, with obviously no names, but
of course.
the type of people who would get one, or someone who's suffered from this.
Right. So this is where it all started in 2012. So whilst I'm sitting on dealing with consumers, one of my first victims that I ever dealt with was a chap called Len, and he was in his 90s, and he lived he was quite affluent. He lived in a lovely flat, a seafront flat in Eastbourne.
Mm.
And we'd had a call from him in 2008 saying he'd received a Spanish lottery letter had he won it. And the advice he was given at the time was, because again we were still in the place where we didn't think people responded. The advice he was given at the time was, "Oh, put it in the bin, shred it, don't respond to it." And then we ran a campaign called a Scamnesty in East Sussex, where we were asking people to put their scam mail in big yellow bins in the library so that we could identify what was landing on people's doormats, so that we
Right.
could have a look from an intelligence base and then feed all that back to central government, with the OFT as it was then. And Len's carer at that time came forward and said, "I think one of my people that I look after is responding to this sort of mail." And obviously we knew about him from before, so that was sort of 2-3 years beforehand when he'd phoned to see whether or not he'd actually won this Spanish lottery. So we went to visit him, and he was spending £600 a month on different scam mail.
Oh no.
And what happened was it's grooming for older people. It's
Right.
grooming for older people. So where, again, these people may be socially isolated and don't have anybody to talk to, loneliness is a huge factor, because the criminals become people's friends
Yeah.
and they build a relationship of trust. And it becomes someone to contact and somebody to speak to. So with Len, he wouldn't respond to all. So, for example, he'd been in World War II, so he wouldn't respond to any scam mail that came from Germany,
Right.
but he would respond to all other scam mail.
Right.
And we spent over a year trying to work with him, trying to get him to stop sending different money off to different mailers, and he wouldn't. He was convinced that he was going to win.
And how much do you think Leonard lost?
I have no idea. I have
Right.
no idea. On one day, we tallied up sort of all of the letters he'd received, and I think it was in a month, and if he'd won everything he was supposed to, he would have won something like over £60 million.
Gosh.
Because it's all, and again, when you put it like that, it's trying to put that sort of statistic and figures to the victims to say,
Mm.
look, well, realistically, do you think you're going to win this amount of money? What happened with Len was, because we got to him too late.
Yeah.
And only 5% of scam victims will report the fact that they're a scam victim, because they don't know they're a scam victim, because they think they're going to win.
Right.
They don't know where to report it to, or they're too ashamed to report it. And actually, the cognitive realization that you've been scammed and you've lost a lot of money, some people would rather just live in the denial. Like, people live in denial all the time, don't they, about everything, about smoking, I smoke too much, I drink too much, I eat too much. It's a similar sort of psychology.
Yeah.
But if we'd managed to get to Len earlier, we may have been able to break that cycle of victimization. We may have been able to get in there earlier before he was so entrenched and groomed that we might have been able to chink that belief that he'd actually won those different lotteries or inheritance, etc., etc. Because
Yeah.
Len actually ended up becoming part of the criminal network and ended up being what's called a money mule, and ended up moving the money out of the country for the criminals in the end. He became part of the criminal network.
Oh my gosh.
So taking money from other scam victims into his bank account and then passporting it out of the country.
Wow. Wow. So Now, I mean, I know you've got I know there is, you have a team of people. I mean, and you've launched some initiatives. One that I've taken note here of is the Friends Against Scams. Can you tell me how that would work?
Yeah, well, so for the reason that the National Trading Standards Scams team exists is because what we did was we started to work with other law enforcement and other sectors like Royal Mail and the banking sector, so for example the Met Police, to seize the criminals, the suckers list. It's an unfortunate name, they're called suckers lists.
Right.
I'm going to use the term victim list for the rest of the interview because I hate the term suckers list, but
Sure.
that's the language that the criminals will use. We started to seize those lists and obtain those lists from the criminals, so that we were able to identify the victims before, so they didn't have to report it.
Right.
So that we weren't asking people to identify themselves as victims. What we were doing was we were seizing the lists that the criminals using the lists that the criminals use to identify where the victims were, so that we could then send that information down to local trading standard services, so they can go out and visit them and say, look, we think you're being targeted by these criminals. Can we come in and talk to you? Can we come and help you? So getting to the victims earlier than we got to Len.
Gosh, but there must be a huge amount of people that you've got to contact.
Well, it depends. It depends on how many lists you end up getting.
Right.
So at the moment we're just under 1 million.
Wow.
We're on just under 1 million victims, potential victims, because obviously not everybody's a victim that's on the list, but some of the lists have been so honed and toned by the criminal groups that they're getting something like marketing lists. So a lot of the time they can be hit and hope, can't they? They target certain demographics, but we found that sometimes the criminals are getting a 60 to 80% return rate.
Because
they're so clever in how they do it. So if I was to scam you, so if I phone you, I ask you if you want to invest in some a high risk investment, but it's a wine investment.
Right.
And you're like, yes, I'm totally in. You offer me, you provide me £10,000. You're in on the high risk wine investment. You never see the wine. You never see that. You get added to a list, and I put a marker by your name. So you then become a valuable commodity, not just from the fact that you give me £10,000, but for me to be able to then sell your data and say, this one will invest in wine, high roller, high risk, likes a bit of a gamble, etc., etc., etc. Put a marker by your name and then sell you on to other people.
Sure.
So it's trafficking of people's personal information is what it is.
So what have people got to, for our listeners, what have people got to watch out for? We've obviously the letter approach, and then you've also just to mention maybe the telephone as well.
Yep. So what we'll often find is if you write to certain people, what they'll do is they'll provide you lots of personal information, which is the first thing criminals will ask for is your telephone number. Right. So when you fill out your winning form for your lottery that you haven't won, potentially you'll then give them your telephone number, your national insurance number, or lots of personal information.
Yeah.
So then they'll be able to then target you on the telephone. So we've had victims who have received a letter on the Monday saying, you've won a £40,000 prize, you just got to send the £20 admin fee.
Right.
And on the Tuesday, a letter says you've only got 6 days left to claim your prize. You don't want your prize to go somewhere else. On the Wednesday, they'll get a phone call saying, we've noticed you still haven't sent your return form in. Do you want to do it over the telephone, or can you send the slip back with all of the information? And then on the Thursday, they'll get a letter from a clairvoyant saying there's money on your cards. So it's this constant reinforcement of the fact that they've won this money, that they need to respond. It's only £20. It's only £20. But what we often find is that these repeat victims could have been sending £20 every day for 10 years.
Wow. So what can you do to prevent this happening?
Right. Okay. So one of our main policy steers is around prevention. Is our focus is actually, if we can stop it happening in the first place, then we'll do ourselves out of a job, which is what we'd like to do. So one of our big focuses is on our, as you've already mentioned, our Friends Against Scams campaign. What we found with the fraud landscape, the market is very saturated in relation to messaging. So you might get a message from your bank saying, never give out your personal information, or you might get a message from Action Fraud saying something different. You might get a message from my team saying something different. It's very confusing. And we also find that some of my background within trading standards was consumer education. Is if it's not relevant to you, quite frankly, our lives are so busy, we do not have capacity at the moment to retain information that isn't relevant to our lives.
Yeah.
So if your TV was faulty, if I tried to educate you now on what to do if your television was faulty, quite frankly, you don't care because your television is not faulty.
Sure.
So with fraud and scams as well, it's also a lot of it is it's never going to happen to me. It's not going. It doesn't. It's not going to be something that affects me. And because of the amount of messaging, we were finding that a lot of it wasn't landing with people.
Right.
So we decided to take a different approach. So Friends Against Scams, sort of the strap line for it is grassroots to grey roots. It's a community resilience piece. So the Friends Against Scams training, you can do a 20-minute online learning, or you can go to a face-to-face session. But what it does is it tries to educate you or me or anybody else around what are the signs that somebody in your world could be being targeted by criminals that are trying to defraud them.
Right.
So it's about how you identify that your mum, your dad, your neighbour, your sister, your auntie may be being targeted by these criminals, because that lands because everybody has somebody that they care about.
Sure.
And it's also about trying to inspire action. So you take that knowledge. So, but you're vicariously educating yourself by actually trying to look out for people in your world that might be being affected
What should
by
people
this.
be looking out for?
There was things like, so if a huge amount of mail, for starters, lots of different mail,
Right.
that would be number one. Things like being secretive, lots of telephone calls, lots of trips to the post office, lots of stamps, lots of talking about their friends, but friends that you don't know about, that you've never heard of before.
Right.
Because they will often refer to the criminals as their friends because they phone them all the time and they speak to them all the time.
Right.
Secrecy. A lot of the time they're told not to tell anybody about it. If they tell people about it, they won't receive their winnings, or they're told sort of to mistrust other people because other people will want their money and want their winnings if they tell other people about it.
Yeah.
So it's about making it, and it's also the shame element of it. So what we try to do is Friends Against Scams is also about taking away the shame, making it, whereas as I say, we're British, we don't talk about money and things like that. So making it conversation as usual, making it something just that we talk about all the time. Fraud and scams. Oh yeah, I was defrauded. Oh yeah, I was silly. Oh, I put my personal details somewhere I shouldn't. And not making it something where there's a stigma where people go, God, you're a bit daft, or you're a bit. It's about educating people that vulnerability isn't a label or a badge. Vulnerability is fluid, and anybody can be vulnerable at any time. And during those periods of vulnerability, if you're targeted by a fraudster or somebody else, potentially you could respond to that, and anybody can be susceptible to it.
And so, Louise, if let's say that you do discover, or you suddenly realise that you have been, a victim of a scam, etc., what are the steps you should take then?
Well, the first thing we would do is to have a conversation with that person about what's happened, about what they've actually done, what information they've actually provided, and if you think that there's a potential possibility that their money may be removed from their bank accounts or anything like that, contact your bank in the first instance. Contact their bank to ensure that the bank is aware of it, because then the bank can put in some protective measures to stop any additional funds going from the accounts.
Right.
And then it would be to report it and get some advice, either from Action Fraud or Citizens Advice.
Right.
Those would be the first steps to do. And then you can also contact your local trading standard to see if they can provide you with additional support and maybe a visit to come and do things like we fit call blockers for consumers who are receiving lots of nuisance and scam calls.
Right.
And we can provide like door stickers in case they're getting doorstep callers. And we can just provide them with real top tips around that sort of that empowerment piece around what things can they say, how to say no to a scammer on the phone. And how to not respond to we recruit people as what we call scam marshals. So rather than responding to the scam mail, we ask them to collect it for us, so that we've got fast time intelligence on what's landing on people's doorsteps, so that we can take the international investigations.
Wow.
So,
and you need more scam marshals?
Always need more scam marshals. We've got 1,500 at the moment, but we need as many as we can get, because then what we can do is we provide the criminals don't target on their own patches. So for example, if you've got an American scammer, they target people in the UK. They don't target people in America, because the UK residents don't phone the American law enforcement to report it. So it's easier for them to target in foreign climates. So what we would do is we would provide all of that information back to the Americans and provide them with a package, so that we're able to take that, the Americans are then able to take that formal investigative action to get those people punished and to stop them doing what they're doing. So we need to know what's getting in. Yeah. Because we also work with the mail providers to stop it getting into the postal system in the first place.
Right.
So we worked in partnership with Royal Mail to stop 5 million pieces of mail actually landing on the doorstep.
Wow.
So it's not getting to the victims. So we're not asking them to then differentiate between legitimate and non-legitimate.
Great.
So, but it's still getting in, but we don't always know how, which is why we need the scam marshals to give us the mail so we can see how it's getting into the system in the first place. And you often don't find out until people have died, and then the relatives don't report it either, because then people have died. So why would you report it at that stage? And it's the damage that it causes. So not just when we talk about financial losses, they're a big deal, but also the damage that it causes to people's self-esteem, to people's mental health, the anxiety that it causes people. You're more likely to go into residential care if you've been scammed or defrauded in your own home.
Wow.
Because people become frightened then, and they become frightened of accessing online. If they got scammed on the bank by their bank account, for example, people then won't use online banking again, or people won't use the internet again, or people get frightened to answer the phone.
People have been forced to go down this route now because, of course, all the closures in the high street. It's proving more and more difficult if you don't use the internet. What was that statistic again, Louise, about how much money you think is?
It's between 5 and 10 billion pounds.
Wow.
A year is lost to the UK economy, but that doesn't account for the sort of, it's something like 50,000 pounds a year for the cost of care and support if you need it. So if you we found, like, we had a lady who was receiving huge amounts of clairvoyant scams and prize draw scams, and she ended up sitting in the dark in her house. She'd used all her utility money to respond to the clairvoyant scams, and then what she'd done was that she didn't want to have the lights and the heating on because she wasn't sure she'd be able to pay for it. And then what had happened was she tinfoiled all of the vents up, and so that because she was worried that bad spirits were going to get into her house via the vents, because that's what she'd been told by a clairvoyant. So people do things like board the loft up because they're scared that the negative vibe is coming down from the loft, because that's what they get told by different clairvoyants. So then they get frightened of being in their own home.
Horrendous.
And then the social isolation becomes worse, which means then the grooming and the coercion and control from the criminals becomes worse. And it's just about breaking. It's similar, like domestic violence. It's a similar situation to that, where people don't report it, do they?
No.
They don't talk about it. They don't report it. It's similar to that. It becomes sort of that coerce and control relationship.
Yeah.
And it can have a real negative. So where we talk about the finance, for me, yes, the finance is important. Obviously, the money is important. But for me, the most important bit is around the effect on people's well-being, and that brutal effect on people's mental health, actually. Yeah. And that's something that we can't quantify. We can't go, oh, that costs X amount of money. But then it's an additional drain on things like the NHS and public health and all of those things because of that. Yeah. But it's something that we don't quantify very well.
So I think this is we'll put a shout out for scam marshals if you're
and Friends Against Scams as well. People to join the Friends Against. We need 1 million friends by the end of this year. We're up to 360,000.
Brilliant.
And we want 1 million friends. We want an army of people at a community level to be able to cascade the messages, to be able to take away the shame and the stigma. And actually, the more we talk about these things, the more resilient that we'll become to them, because we'll start to, it's all about questioning. If something, it's very, I mean, from a simplistic point of view, if it sounds too good to be true, it usually is. So it's all about that question. If you start to question all of the time, then usually things start to unravel, don't they? It's like if somebody's telling you, I liken it to, I have a 9 and a 7-year-old. My 9-year-old is very, very bright, but she tells fibs sometimes. And if you keep questioning, it starts to unravel, doesn't it? It's that constant question. It starts to unravel, and you're like, and I go, she's called Flossie, and I go, Floss, it's not my first day. And she goes, all right, Mum, yeah, all right, I told a lie. with that questioning. So it's similar to that with scams. It's that constant, oh, actually, could that happen? Why would that happen? I need to think 2 steps back. Why have they contacted me? How have they got my personal details? All of those questioning things help us build that resilience piece. And the criminals don't want to have to work that hard to earn 20 quid. They want an easy win, so they move on quickly. So it's about us talking about those things with our friends, with our colleagues, with our family, to build that community resilience so that they go elsewhere. So we have a scam-free nation in a utopia is what we would like.
Absolutely. Well, let's put a call out for that. So Louise, how do people find out more about becoming a Friends Against Scams or a scam marshal and the great work that you're doing?
So Friends Against Scams, it's got a website all of its own. So it's friendsagainstscams.org.uk. And people can do the online training there, or look where there is a face-to-face session if they wanted to go to face-to-face session. What we ask every friend to do once they've completed the training is to make a pledge about what they're going to do with that knowledge that they've learned from that session. So for me, it would be things like talk to 5 people about scams, or share your friend status on social media. Very simple things. If people want to do a bit more, they can become a scam champion, and then they can recruit friends and run their own sessions. So it's you can do things like you could run a session in your community group for 100 people, or you could talk to your book club. So it's varying degrees of how people want to be involved. If you work for an organisation, you can become a Friends Against Scams organisation, and then your CEO or your director can become a scam ambassador. And then what we would ask them to do is to champion the initiatives and to champion these sort of anti-fraud messages from their senior position. So there's lots of ways that people can get involved. It's all on the Friends Against Scams website, the same as all of the scam marshal information's on there as well. So there's lots of ways that people can get involved, as much or as little as they want.
Brilliant. Well, that was fantastic. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to say before we close?
I don't think so. I think I talk quite a lot, don't I? Get quite excited about this stuff.
Hugely informative and great for our listeners, and I'm really wiser to the fact now. So, to find out more about the work that Louise and her team are doing at the National Trading Standards Scams team and how to protect yourself and your loved ones from financial crime, check out all the show notes where we'll put all the links that Louise mentioned there on our website at theretirementcafe.co.uk. And then you'll be able to link in and decide what you're going to do. And let us know whether you're taking up on this initiative. I think all our listeners should possibly get involved, and it would be brilliant if we can really up the ante on this and really help out. So as always, if you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes to help more people like you to find us, and please share this episode with friends and family who you may find this interesting or actually can help them protect against scams. To be sure you never miss an episode, hit the subscribe button on your preferred podcast player, or visit the website retirementcafe.co.uk, where you can also subscribe to our weekly podcast emails. So once again, thank you to Louise. Really, really great chatting with you today. And once again, also thanks to the Timeline app for sponsoring the podcast. Until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.